CSS grid layouts are important when it comes to designing a good web page. This is because layouts are a way to provide visual cues for a user by organizing relevant content to make it easier to comprehend. So let's learn more about layouts. When someone says the word grid, you probably think of lines that cross each other to form squares or rectangles. CSS grids are two-dimensional design layouts that are responsive and compatible with browser variations. They are an alternative to other options such as flexboxes and tables, especially when you are working with larger scale layouts. Columns are the vertical tracks and rows are the horizontal tracks in your viewport. Grids divide the page into rows and columns, and the space between these tracks are called gutters or gaps. And a cell is the space in a grid container where a row and column intersect. There are several different configurations you can add to define and modify grids. Let's examine an example that uses a HTML document to demonstrate how to iteratively make changes to a grid. First, let's create a HTML document called index.html. Right now, the contents displayed in the viewport are just a vertical series of letters from A to E without any styling. Let's start adding content to the CSS file. The first thing to do is set the values for the properties of the different box classes inside the container object to make the layout look more presentable. The letters now have a better visual design, but their arrangement on screen is unchanged. The result is that each letter occupies more screen space than is necessary for its size. What's displayed in the viewport may appear to be a grid, but it's not actually one. It's just the default settings of CSS for a layout. Once you convert this into the grid layout, you'll be able to recognize the flexibility it can add. So let's convert it into a grid layout. Set the properties of the container class by first assigning a grid value to the display property. The display property is also used to set display types for other designs such as flex, block, inline, and so on, and it's usually a part of container elements inside our code. The updated container now has the display property value set to grid and the property values configured for 3 columns and 2 rows. That's 2 changes from the previous configuration. Let's examine them. The grid template columns property has been added into the CSS code to set the size of each of the 3 columns using pixel values. The use of FR, which is an abbreviation for fraction, has been introduced. Fraction effectively divides the grid, and the page now displays 5 separate grid cells around the letters, which are arranged in 3 columns and 2 rows. Where applied, the grid tracks are divided proportionately to the ratio of all the fraction values present. As there are 2 rows, the defined values are sized in the ratio of 2:1. Fraction adds flexibility to the grid without needing to deal with actual pixel sizes. It must be noted, though, that fraction and pixel sizes can be used interchangeably with both rows and columns. Now to add a couple of properties such as grid gap or gutter and background color to define the grid. The updated view displays a red box representing the grid because that's what the background color's RGB value was set to. The grid stretches by default the entire width of the page. And the size of the grid track or gutter has been adjusted to 10 pixels, which leaves more space between the grid cells. You can also opt to use the auto properties such as grid auto rows and grid auto columns, collectively called the implicit grid. Let's replace the grid template rows property in the code with grid auto rows. All the rows are now auto resized to 100 pixels. Now let's examine some of the functions that can make configuring the layout easier. First, the repeat function passes the number of repeats required for a given number of rows and columns. The result of the code adjustment is an unchanged web page from the last instance because the repeat function didn't change anything, it just reduced the amount of code you needed to write. Therefore, the repeat function helps reduce redundancy and provides ease of code modification. Next, the min-max function sets the minimum and maximum values expected for the sizes of rows and columns. Let's set the value for the grid auto rows to 150 pixels. The output is modified so that the minimum size of each row is 150 pixels. One more important concept is grid frameworks. There are a number of commonly used grid frameworks in layouts. 2 such grid design layouts are known as the 12 and 16 column grids. They divide the page into 12 and 16 tracks respectively along the vertical columns. The properties can be modified accordingly to target a specific track. CSS grid layouts are so important when it comes to good web page design, and this video has demonstrated that layouts provide visual cues for the user by organizing content in a way that makes it easier to understand. Who knows, soon you'll be building your own web pages and you'll be able to test out some of the techniques shown in this video. And don't forget the repeat and min-max functions. They'll save you time and effort.